In 1990, one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood looked Clint Eastwood in the eye and said 7 words that would have destroyed any other man's career. You're not bankable anymore. You're finished. Clint didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't walk out. He just smiled, not the smile of a man who found something funny, not the nervous smile of someone trying to hide their fear, the slow, quiet smile of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The smile of someone who already knew how the story ended, and what he did next didn't just save his career, it changed Hollywood forever. It was a Tuesday morning in February 1990. The kind of morning Los Angeles does in winter, pale blue sky, thin sunlight, the city moving through its routines with that particular manufactured optimism that never quite convinces anyone who has been there long enough to see through it. Clint Eastwood was 59 years old. By Hollywood standards, that was ancient. Not older, but distinguished ancient. Not Silver Fox still commanding the room ancient. Just done. Yesterday's news dressed in today's clothes, waiting politely to be told it was time to leave. The industry had a rule, unspoken but understood by everyone who had spent more than a year inside the machine. Once you passed 55, you were a relic, a name from another era, something to be respected at award ceremonies, quoted in retrospectives, and quietly forgotten everywhere else. The studios had spreadsheets that proved it, audience research that confirmed it, focus groups of two-year-olds, who couldn't quite place your face anymore and didn't particularly care that they couldn't. But Clint had never been fully of Hollywood. Not really. He had worked it, mastered its machinery and its politics and its particular brand of controlled chaos, but he had kept something separate, something the industry couldn't quite reach, no matter how long it tried. He had spent 3 decades building something rare, not a brand, not a persona carefully assembled by a team of publicists. A career built not on studio politics, not on yes men, not on playing the game, but on one thing only, integrity. He showed up on time, every single time. Rain, cold, exhaustion, personal problems, none of it was an excuse. The call time was the call time. When Clint said 6 a.m., he was in his chair at 5:45, coffee in hand, shot list memorized, ready to work before most of his crew had finished their own preparations. Not because a contract required it, because 75 other people had also set their alarms for 4:30 a.m. and driven an hour through the dark to be there, and their time was worth exactly as much as his. He learned every person's name on set, from the director of photography to the grip to the kid who brought coffee. He remembered those names across productions, across years. He would run into a crew member he had worked with a decade earlier and call them by name before they could introduce themselves. He never demanded a trailer bigger than anyone else's, never threw a script against a wall or raised his voice at a department head in front of their team. He simply worked methodically, efficiently, with a quiet focus that the people around him found simultaneously inspiring and slightly humbling. That was Clint Eastwood. But Hollywood doesn't reward integrity. Hollywood rewards money. And in early 1990, the numbers weren't looking good. His last 2 films had underperformed. Not catastrophically, not yet, but the trend line was wrong. The trajectory was heading somewhere that made accountants nervous, and producers start having quiet conversations in corners at industry events. Word traveled fast in Hollywood. It always did. And the word on Clint Eastwood was that he had had his run, a great run, everyone agreed. But runs ended. The market moved on. That was just the nature of things. The meeting was held at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, Conference Room B, third floor, long mahogany table, 8 leather chairs. One window with half-drawn blinds letting in pale February light. The kind of room designed to communicate power without personality, authority without warmth. Clint arrived alone. No agent, no lawyer, no publicist, just him. A simple jacket, jeans, and the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove and had stopped trying to prove it so long ago that the effort had ceased to exist as a consideration. Across the table sat Richard Baylor, 44 years old, Harvard MBA, 3 blockbusters in 4 years, the kind of man who wore his power like a bespoke suit, expensive, perfectly tailored, impossible to ignore, and designed to communicate that he had already won whatever room he walked into. He had a folder in front of him, thick, well organized. Inside were numbers, box office results broken down by demographic, audience surveys, market research projections, cold, brutal numbers arranged to build a case that appeared to close itself. 3 other executives sat along the wall, not at the table, along the wall. Witnesses, not participants, there to observe and to remember. Baylor opened the folder without looking up. Your last 2 films underperformed, he said. Clinical, practiced, combined domestic gross was $47 million. That's not a career. That's a slow decline. Clint said nothing. We've done focus groups. Audiences under 35 don't connect with you the way they used to. They want something different, younger, faster, louder. Still nothing from Clint. The 3 executives along the wall watched him carefully. Baylor finally looked up. I'm going to be direct with you, Clint. You're not bankable anymore. The market has moved on. I think it's time you consider transitioning, producing maybe some television work, smaller projects that fit your current profile. The room went quiet. The 3 executives shifted almost imperceptibly. None of them made eye contact with Clint. They had all heard Baylor deliver verdicts like this before. They knew what came next. Usually tears, sometimes anger, the hot, undignified anger of someone who knows they are losing and can't stop themselves from showing it. Always desperation, the sudden negotiation, the please just give me one more chance that never worked and yet kept happening because people couldn't help themselves. That was what happened when Baylor told someone their time was up. But Clint Eastwood wasn't most people. He leaned back in his chair slowly. He looked at Baylor the way Walt Kowalski looked at a man who had just made a very serious mistake without yet understanding its magnitude. Calm, patient, certain. Not the false calm of someone suppressing anger. The settled certainty of a man who had spent 59 years learning exactly who he was and had long since stopped requiring other people's confirmation of that knowledge. Richard, he said quietly, how old was John Ford when he made The Searchers? Baylor blinked. The question was so far outside the expected parameters of this meeting that his considerable mental machinery simply stalled. I don't know. 61. How old was Howard Hawks when he made Rio Bravo? Silence. 63. You want to talk about bankable? Those films are still making money 50 years later, still teaching, still moving people. Your focus groups were wrong then, too. The 2-year-olds didn't connect with them either. And then they grew up, and those films were waiting. Baylor shifted in his chair. That was a different era, Clint. The market, Clint interrupted. his voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of every film he had ever made and every compromise he had refused to make them, has always been people who want real stories about real things that actually matter. He stood up. He didn't slam his hands on the table, didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just stood, and the simple act of standing seemed to rearrange something in the room's atmosphere. The executives along the wall sat straighter without noticing they were doing it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed on the table in front of Richard Baylor a single document. Not a rebuttal, not a counter proposal, a script. It was well worn. The pages were soft at the edges from handling. This was not something prepared for this meeting. This was something lived with, worked over, carried around and thought about and returned to until it had become, in some essential way, part of the man presenting it. I've been working on something, Clint said, a Western, revisionist, dark. It doesn't celebrate violence. It asks what violence actually costs a man. Not in dramatic terms, in human terms. It doesn't offer easy redemption. It asks whether redemption is even possible for someone who has done the things this man has done. It's about guilt that doesn't go away with time, about a broken man trying to figure out if the wreckage of his life means anything at all. He looked at Baylor with steady, unwavering eyes. Every major studio in this town has passed on it. Too slow, too dark, too old-fashioned, too much of everything your focus groups say audiences don't want. You know what I think about that? Baylor looked down at the script in plain typewriter font. 2 words. Unforgiven. I think, Clint said, buttoning his jacket, that the people in this room are the ones who are finished, not me. He walked to the door, then stopped, one hand on the frame. He turned back one final time and looked at Richard Baylor across the full length of that conference room. I'm making this film, with or without Warner Brothers, with whatever I have to spend of my own money. And when it wins Best Picture, not if, Richard, when I want you to sit in that theater and think about this room, think about this folder, think about what you almost did. He left. The door closed behind him with a sound that seemed, in the silence that followed, much heavier than it had any right to be. Richard Baylor sat at the head of the table and stared at the script Clint Eastwood had left behind. The title looked back at him without apology. Unforgiven. Nobody spoke for a very long time. 2 years later, March 29th, 1993, the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, the 65th Academy Awards. Unforgiven won 4 Oscars that night. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Film Editing. The film every major studio had passed on. The film that was too slow, too dark, too old-fashioned, too internal. $159 million worldwide. Critics who had grown tired of the Western suddenly had a new benchmark for what the genre could be. Film schools began teaching it within a year. When Clint walked to the stage to accept Best Director, the entire audience rose to their feet. Not politely, not out of obligation. They stood because they had witnessed something rare. A man told with complete institutional confidence that his time was over, who responded not with argument, not with anger, not with desperation, who simply went back to work and created something that would outlast every spreadsheet assembled to prove his irrelevance. Richard Baylor was in the audience that night. He did not stand. Some said he couldn't, that the weight of having been that completely wrong about that man had become, over those 2 years, something physical that pressed down on him when the moment came. Here is what Clint Eastwood understood that morning that Richard Baylor never did. The people who tell you your time is over are not seeing you. They are looking at a chart and seeing a trend line heading in the wrong direction. They are looking at a folder full of numbers and seeing a case that closes itself. They are not seeing you. They are seeing their own fear. Their fear that the rules they built their power on might not be the only rules. Their fear that talent doesn't expire on a schedule aligned with anyone's fiscal year. Their fear that integrity, the kind that shows up on time and learns every name and never asks for a bigger trailer and trusts the work and lets the work be enough, outlasts every trend, every cycle, every wave of market enthusiasm that ever swept through this industry. Their fear that they might simply be wrong. Clint didn't fight Baylor with anger or pride. He didn't beg, didn't negotiate, didn't offer concessions or ask for one more chance. He simply went back to work, back to the script he had been carrying in his jacket, back to the story he believed in, the characters he understood, the themes he knew with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent a career learning to trust his instincts above market research would matter to real people in ways no focus group could measure, because that is what people of real character do when the world tells them they are finished, not the character praised in speeches. The character that exists at 5:45 inches the morning when the alarm goes off and the work is waiting and nobody is watching. The character that holds its shape under pressure, that knows the difference between what the world is telling you and what is actually true. When the world tells you that you're finished, you don't argue. Arguing keeps you in the room with the folder and the focus groups and the trend lines. Arguing makes their framework the only framework. You don't argue, you create. You go back to the thing you know how to do, the thing you have spent your whole life learning to do, and you do it with everything you have. You trust that if you make something real, something born from genuine understanding, genuine craft, genuine care, it will find the people it was always meant to find. And you let the work speak in a language that no boardroom, no focus group, and no powerful man with a folder full of numbers can ever silence. That is what bankable really means. Not a number in a spreadsheet, not a trend line going in the right direction, a body of work that outlasts the people who said it couldn't be made, a name that means something, not because a marketing team decided it should, but because the work earned it one frame at a time, one early morning at a time, one decision to do the difficult true thing instead of the easy false thing at a time. Clint Eastwood didn't save his career in that conference room. He didn't win an argument or charm a reluctant executive into giving him one more shot. He simply remembered who he was, and then he went and proved it. If this story moved you, subscribe, hit the like button, and share it with someone who has been told their best days are behind them. Someone sitting across from their own Richard Baylor right now, listening to a folder full of numbers explain why they're finished. Tell them about the man who simply smiled when he heard those words, because your best days aren't behind you, not even remotely close.